Where's your head at in terms of your return to action?
I think obviously that's a fight that I want. I want the White House. First and foremost, I want the White House. Ideally, if it becomes Conor, that would be awesome. Obviously we have some animosity or some unfinished business. Once again, I just said there's not really animosity. I got respect for him. He's got respect for me, but we do have an unfinished business. And he has, expressed interest. When he put out that meme of me and him, I guess you could call it a meme. It was AI. It was me and him. He's called me out on Twitter and said we have unfinished business, and we do. We have unfinished business. We would be the only fighters not to fight after the Ultimate Fighter who were in the same weight class. And Conor and I, it makes sense. I did my job. I signed on the dotted line. I've still never pulled out of a fight, never missed weight. The most important thing about this White House card, and whether I am a shoe-in for it or not, when you're building a card of this magnitude, it's not necessarily even about putting on the best fight. It's about putting on the best fights that are the most reliable. Which fighters and which matchups, which marquee contests are going to happen on the White House lawn that have an almost virtual certainty of actually happening. In this crazy sport, there are no guarantees, but I'm about as sure as a guarantee as you possibly could be. Like I said, never missed weight, never pull out of a fight. And if I can walk to the octagon, if I can physically make it to the octagon, I'm showing up that cage, that octagon door is closing, and I'm putting on a show for the fans.
It is a freaking celebration for America. How do we not have an American in the main event? Now, I get Conor. Conor's a star, and Conor's a huge guy. I know he's met with President Trump and, those kind of things, and that's awesome. But, it's got to be, if it's going to be Conor, it's got to be an American fighting him, right? You can't fight anybody else. So, I think it just makes perfect sense it'd be you and him.
Agree. Yeah. I mean, like I said, we built the foundation with Tough 31. We have unfinished business. We did get to within, what was it, 13 days before the June 29th card, International Fight Week last year, whenever the news broke. I got the call from Hunter Campbell that he really was not going to fight. And then since then, it's been a little bit of talk about me and him there and there. There's never talks of any other opponent, so there's no other opponent that really makes sense. Now, obviously, there's always going to be speculation. Would love to see Conor fight this guy or that guy, but ultimately, Conor knows, and I believe as much flack as he takes, he's more of a man of his word when it comes to this sport than people give him credit for. Now, with that being said, it does make sense, and with that being said, the UFC is in charge. Dana and Hunter can make whatever decision that they want, but I'm the type of guy who trusts my gut on this, and I believe it's going to be me and Conor. If Conor's coming back and he's actually fighting at the White House, there's no reason why we should not headline it. And even last week, Dana said, obviously, Conor has always been that guy. We've talked to him 48 hours before the fight, opponent changed, switched it up, and he shows up. If anything, those are the type of things that fuel Conor. So the White House makes a lot of sense for him to come back. And obviously, I would love to fight on that card for a multitude of reasons, not the least of which is the fact that it would be the biggest card that the UFC has ever put on the White House lawn, 250th anniversary of this great nation of ours. And it would absolutely be an honor.
Do you really believe the White House card 2026, we will see Conor McGregor?
I think we're definitely a lot closer today than we ever have been. I've heard the comments from Feldman, his business partner, who they spend a lot of time with. I do have some inside sources of people close to him who have said the same exact sentiment. And obviously, withdrawing from the race of President of Ireland gets his focus a little bit more back on training. And I've said a version of this 1,000 times too about us fighters in general. When you get into the sport, you want the biggest fights, the brightest lights, the most amount of money, the most eyeballs you possibly can. And Conor has been no exception to that, or Conor has done that his entire career, and all of the pay-per-view records and the biggest spectacles that you possibly could be on. That's exactly what Conor McGregor's brand is, and that's exactly what myself and every single fighter wants. So, yeah, when this White House fight card got announced, obviously Conor tweeted about it or threw something out there about it, and it seemed like a lot of sometimes smoke and mirrors, a little bit of blunder here and there, but ultimately, if there ever was a card that Conor McGregor comes back for, it makes a lot of sense that it would be this one, because it just, until they put an octagon on Mars or they put an octagon on the top of Mount Rushmore or something, I can't really think of a place that could be more historic, where the entire world will tune in, not to mention the new Paramount deal with network television. This would be live on network television. it would be rivaling the Super Bowl in my honest opinion. So it doesn't get any bigger than this in this sport, especially. So I think we're closer now than we ever have been. I've always said, if you're a betting man, don't put money on him necessarily coming back. But now this changes things a lot. In my heart of hearts, I think I'm fighting Conor McGregor at the White House, and that sure does make a ton of sense for a multitude of reasons.
Right now, we're kind of up in the air about what's going on at lightweight. And I know you've had a lot of high praise for Ilia Topuria, what he did to go out there and beat Charles Oliveira and become champion. What kind of a chance do you give Paddy if he gets that Ilia Topuria fight?
It's a good question, because Paddy is better than most will give him credit for. Obviously, I've shared the octagon with him. His presence, his octagon presence was on point. He knew where he needed to be. He was completely okay with getting taken down that first round. He kept great distance, kept me off with the kicks. Topuria being a little bit shorter than me, but great punching power, punches in bunches, and not just the punches when he throws them and they land, but knowing when to throw his combinations, knowing when to not throw his combinations, when to just stalk. And he does a really good job of stalking guys, because most guys are going to be running away from that right hand, that left hook, the uppercut, because obviously, as we saw with Charles Oliveira, as we saw in a lot of Topuria's fights, the man will put out anybody that he's going to fight. I think Paddy would have a good chance to keep it past a round or two, because he's not going to engage, I think, as much as Oliveira did, and we all found out how Oliveira would do if that right hand left hook lands. But ultimately, I think Topuria, it's not as big of a mismatch as most people think, but it's definitely a mismatch, and that's just because we're talking Ilia Topuria. Now, if we were talking a year ago and we were talking about the lightweight division and Paddy after our fight in April and him maybe fighting next, I think he's got more of a chance. But I think Ilia Topuria is easily the most talented guy, not just in our division, but I think in the entire sport. And that's my personal opinion. So we'll see if that fight gets made. But I do think Paddy would be not in a great scenario for him to go out there and fight fire with probably the best striker on the planet.
Who do you believe is the toughest matchup for Ilia? Not who's going to get the fight. Who has the best chance to beat him out of the current crop of lightweight contenders? And also taking yourself out of the equation, because I know there's a world where you're like, I have a game plan, I can beat that guy. But take yourself out of the equation. Who right now has the best chance of actually beating Ilia?
Yeah, I do see people, talking online that they want to see me fight Ilia, and it's like, guys, I have not earned that. I had the opportunity. If I would have beat Charles, I could have fought Ilia next. But man, I mean, obviously those three guys, Gaethje, Paddy, and Arman, are kind of the 1A and 1B of everybody's hope or thought of who's going to fight him next. So I think just between those guys, because I can't really think right now of somebody who I think would be who has the resume and strength of schedule thus far to say that they'd be able to go out there and have a decent showing against Ilia. Of the three, I tend to lean towards Arman, because Arman's got, I think, the best grappling prowess, probably the strongest guy of those three. Paddy's probably the biggest guy, but Paddy's got kind of that loosey-goosey jiu-jitsu, if you will, compared to like Arman's a little bit more hammering. And then Gaethje obviously has grappling. We were just talking the other day, he was an All-American, the Division I wrestling. He's got grappling, he's got wrestling, he just chooses not to use it. So that would be largely a stand-up battle when it becomes to those two. I think Arman of those three, but I don't think Arman is getting the next title shot. I think the UFC realizes, one, you pulled out of the fight the day before, you need to fight another, and two, you're just not that interesting. So we'll see.